Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the NYC3 meeting. This is one of our monthly or every other monthly meetings that we are conducting now via Zoom. Today's date is July the 14th, 2020. It's 10:30 Eastern Standard Time, and we welcome all of you. Most of these are our NYC3 members who are joining us. Sharon Tapper and myself are the co-founders of this organization, and we come together to educate and network our community with the hopes of really building business in the songwriting and publishing community in New York City. Today we have a very special guest, Kris Ahrend, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the MLC, the Mechanical Licensing Collective. As you all know, and Kris, our guests, our members are pretty well versed in this this end of the business. Everyone was excited when the Music Modernization Act was passed in October of 2018. And as a result, a wonderful collective was developed, a licensing agent to collect the royalties on behalf of songwriters and publishers. The MLC was born. Similar to the Sound Exchange, this is the Song Exchange, if you will, that will be collecting royalties on behalf of your songwriters and publishers. Without further ado, I know the MLC has been fast at work. They are still on schedule. They've been working harder than ever during COVID. Kris is overseeing the whole operation. He's been hiring left and right. He's based out of Nashville, but he's a New York native, and we love that about him. He is the CEO of the MLC. I'll give you a little bit of background on him. He came from Warner Music Group's Center of Excellence for Shared Services in Nashville, and he overall saw the whole operations of that for 15 different functional teams, from administrative, financial, and legal services. He began his career in the music industry working for Sony Music in the law department, where he provided legal services for the US division, including its publishing company. He's got a big background in legal affairs from Sony BMG Music Entertainment before accepting the senior executive role at Rhino Entertainment. He graduated from Binghamton University and Washington and Lee School of Law. He's also, you were a law clerk in Virginia, my hometown, very cool. But now he's in Nashville and has been there for a while and is building this MLC. So Kris, please take it away. If I've left anything out of your background, please share it with us and let us know how it's going with the MLC.
Thank you so much, Linda. Just want to make sure that you can hear me. I'm not on mute. Good. You certainly covered enough. I'm a New Yorker and find myself living in Nashville, and that's another story for another day, but happy to tell that one over drinks if we ever can get back together. The one thing I would say, though, maybe to frame what I've done, I grew up as a musician playing piano and guitar and hoping that I might be able to make a living doing that. And I'd like to think I was smart enough to realize that that wasn't in the cards for me, but that's where my story began. And though I've done a lot of different things in the music industry, where ultimately I've found myself is sort of back at the beginning, but in a slightly different role. I realized at some point in my professional career that all of our companies, any company that deals with content, we essentially make two promises to creators. The first is that we will work with them to cultivate their creativity. And of course, that's what leads to the music that we love. But the second promise we make is that we promise to pay them. And ideally, we pay them properly and accurately and on time. And that is always the thing that I think our industry has struggled with. And over time, the thing that I became passionate about. So I've had a lot of different roles behind the scenes at record companies, and now working at the MLC, and most of it has been focused on getting all of the stuff behind the scenes that can be so difficult and so challenging right, so that we pay people properly. That's what I've come to work to do every day. So the MLC is a perfect opportunity for me because that's essentially what the MLC is about. It is a company that will be focused on making sure that all the stuff behind the scenes works better so that people get paid properly. And there's lots more we could say about how we'll do that, but fundamentally that's what we do and that's our mission. Everyone we hire, we make that point clear. We're here as a service organization to make sure that people get paid. And if that's not what you're into, then this is not the right place for you. More specifically, to maybe be technical, just so that we're all aligned, the role of the MLC will be to issue a new blanket license to digital audio services that operate in the US. That license covers digital audio mechanicals, not video. So when you think about a lot of the videos you watch on YouTube, we're not going to be a part of that aspect of the business. We're going to start issuing those blanket licenses in January 1st of 2021. So we're still a little less than 6 months away from the beginning of that, that licensing period. We call that the license availability date. And then one of the big things that we'll be doing behind the scenes is we'll be taking all this usage data that comes from digital services that they'll have to provide us, and we'll be matching the sound recording data with the musical works data that we will be compiling in order to make the connections we need to figure out where the money has to go. In other words, who gets paid. And depending on your perspective, that can be the most interesting thing in the world or one of the most boring things in the world, but it's a data operation at heart. And for those of you that are self-proclaimed data geeks or data nerds, that's what we'll be doing. And of course, the value in that is making sure that the data and the money flow properly to the right people. The fact that there will be a blanket license doesn't mean that everything will run through us. We'll be doing that matching for everything, but digital services and music publishers still have the ability to do direct deals. And for those of you that are music publishers or represent music publishers, you may be well aware that your clients have direct deals with some of the services. So nothing about the MLC says that those direct deals have to go away. And in fact, we expect that at least for some period of time, a lot of them will continue, and they may continue indefinitely. So what we'll be doing is the matching for all the usage activity. Then we'll be providing back reports that tell the DSPs, here's the activity that is covered by the blanket. Here's the activity that's covered by the voluntary licenses you've told us about. And then they'll be able to administer the voluntary activity in whatever way they see fit. They could engage the MLC separately to do that, or they can engage another service provider, or they could do it themselves. So again, voluntary deals don't go away, but we think it's pretty likely that every digital service will want that blanket license as a foundation. And there's certain things they're going to have to do, even if they wanted to keep everything voluntary in order to enable us to do our job. I'm going to skip ahead now, knowing that this is a group of folks that do lots of different things. The challenge is not going too deep in one area where it might be interesting to some of you, but then boring the rest. So forgive me as I kind of jump in and out. But one of the other subjects I thought might be interesting to hear about, people will often ask, well, what does this cost? And the answer is, well, it costs a lot to build the organization, but the key is that our operational costs will not be passed on to publishers or writers. So for publishers and writers that we are paying, our services will be free. One of the interesting and rather unique aspects of the MMA is that the funding for the operation of the MLC comes from the digital services. And in almost every other instance, where there is a collective management organization like ours, it works the other way. The operational costs come out of the royalties that that organization collects, which essentially means that if you're on the receiving end of a payment, you're paying for that organization. You're paying for the privilege of being paid by that organization. For the MLC, it does not work that way. 100% of what we collect gets preserved and will ultimately get passed through to publishers and writers. From a timeline perspective, as Linda alluded, we've been working pretty feverishly for the last 6 months behind the scenes to build a company. There are a lot of practical things involved there that many of you may know about, especially if you own or are part of a smaller business. Really practical stuff that we need to be able to do what we're going to do. We will then, and have begun to do some of our first public-facing things now as we turn the corner on the second half of the year. I'll touch briefly on the data quality initiative and this music data organization form we put out. But the real meaningful thing that I think will connect for most of our stakeholders will be the portal, the user portal that we'll be rolling out a little later this summer. I say roll out because it'll be a process. We're not just going to open the door and say, everybody come in, but we're going to try to do that in a way that allows us to manage the volume of people coming in and provide a great level of service to those folks so that that process goes smoothly. And then for the rest of the year, we'll be working with folks who have signed up and become members of the MLC and set up those user accounts to help them organize and clean up their data. So we want to try to get as much of a head start on cleaning up the data as we can in advance of that license availability date. But of course, even when we turn the corner to January, we still have probably a month and a half before we'll get that first usage report from the services, and then another month or so before we send out the first royalty statement. So practically speaking, folks won't see any payments from us until next spring. But again, that's sort of the kind of the set of key milestones that will take place between now and then. I touched on building a company. We will be based in Nashville, and we will likely have a physical headquarters, though right now, like all of you, we're operating fully remotely. And even though we'll be based in Nashville, we do have people on the team in other places. Right now, we've got senior folks in New York, in Los Angeles, in Miami, and in London. So we're trying to kind of strike the balance between having an operational base, both for our company and a place where we think we'll have an opportunity to engage with many of our stakeholders. Nashville is obviously a hub for songwriting and for music publishing, but we want to make sure we have people in other places. And like today, we want to try to make efforts to meet our stakeholders where they are. And certainly for me as a New Yorker, when we can get back on the road again, I hope and expect to be back in New York and meeting some of you in person. If I don't, my mom will have something to say about that. We are fully remote, fully distributed. We've got 36 employees as of today. So we've hired quite a bit in 6 months. When I joined in January, it was 6 months yesterday, we were 2 employees and now we're at 36. And as Linda said, you know, we have been impacted by COVID, but our timeline has not been impacted by COVID. So everything that we have done has changed because of the pandemic. And I don't have to tell any of you about what that looks like, because of course, New York has probably been hit harder by this than any place in the country, though sadly, a lot of the cities closer to me now are doing their best, it seems, to catch up. But we're not letting those challenges alter the timeline. It's really important for us, and I say us, meaning all of us that will benefit from the MLC, to stay on track and to make sure that we can begin doing the things we need to do next January. 3 things that I wanted to highlight, 3 points to consider, and this will get toward the end of the remarks that I wanted to offer, and we can get to questions, and I'll try to pay attention to the chat as well if people put questions there. First, the data. People have begun asking about the data, and for understandable reasons, because data historically in our industry has been a proprietary thing that companies have held and not generally shared. One of the other unique things about the MLC is that we are required by law to make the musical works data we compile available to anyone who wants to see it. So what that means is if we're paying you and you have signed up to access the user portal, you'll have access to your data and the data that we ultimately make public, that musical works data. If you are not a member, you'll have the ability to access the data publicly through a public search part of the website that we'll set up, or the portal. And then any organization will be able to purchase a bulk download of all of that musical works data, and the statute says at cost, which in my mind means as little as possible, right? It's buying a big data file. And in that way, I think the sort of interesting shift of mindset that we're hoping people will make is that the data that the MLC is now going to compile is essentially everyone's data. Everyone will have the ability to look at it. Everyone will have the ability to run analysis on it. And you can look at it for your own purposes. You can look at it more broadly for other purposes, but the data will become a public good. And that I think is really significant, because one of the big challenges around data is access. And if you don't have access to the data that impacts how you get paid, then you don't have the ability to know whether you're being paid properly. You have to ask questions about things you don't know and can't see. And my hope, and certainly the requirements I've touched on, will shift that dynamic and make the data public such that you can see that. As a corollary to that, we have partnered with HFA both to provide that initial data set and also to help us perform some of the administrative tasks. And that's something that gets a lot of attention. I want to start by emphasizing the reasons for that the board articulated, because that decision was made before I joined the company. In order to do this and get it up and running as quickly as we needed to do it, it was really difficult, and I think many would say impossible, for us to start from scratch. Start from scratch would have meant building the architecture literally from scratch, and then reaching out to every one of our stakeholders and saying, give us your data for the first time. And I think even on this group, you can imagine each of you probably has a different solution for maintaining your data. Even if everybody kept it in Excel, which was not possible for larger users, the format, the order of your columns would be different. The names on the headers would be different. And to build from scratch, we would have to coordinate the alignment of all of that data, ingest it all, and then build from scratch a database. So the decision was that wasn't practical. So partnering with HFA allowed us to get access to a very large data set. And that accelerated the process. Is it a perfect data set? Absolutely not. And HFA would tell you that if you asked, but I don't think you need to ask, because if any of you have dealt with HFA, you know it's not perfect. And a part of why it's not perfect was because it was a private database, right? It was a private data set like any other. And while it reflected data that at some point users gave them, the management of that was difficult, and therefore the quality suffered. And so the HFA database, or the data, I should say, right, as a starting point is something that we all acknowledge is not perfect, not close to perfect. It's not good enough, but it's a starting point. And that's why the engagement that we're encouraging and trying to facilitate becomes so important. Because again, if this data is now going to become a public good, something that all of us get to use and enjoy and have access to, then it really becomes incumbent on each of us to make sure that our data is in the best shape possible. And I say incumbent, not for any authoritative reasons or authoritarian reasons, but because ultimately, if that's the thing that's going to help you get paid properly, it's really about self-interest. You want that data to be in the best shape possible, because that's how you're going to get paid properly. And again, you're going to be in the best position to know if your data is accurate. And while you could rely on the upwards of maybe 100, probably closer to 75 people that we'll employ in our company to do that for you, you're far better off taking an interest in that yourselves and looking at that. And then again, our role becomes helping you to do that, helping to build the framework, the systems, the processes that make it as easy as possible, and hopefully easier and easier over time for you to manage your data effectively. And then again, that ensures that the system works for each of you. So to that end, we announced, I think it was last week, this idea of playing your part, and two initiatives around that, right? Play your part is about, hey, here's what you can do to help make the data better for you, right? That's an easy and I think an important message. The data quality initiative was focused on people who aggregate musical works data on behalf of others, primarily, at least because we view that as a volume proposition. If you're managing thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of musical works, you've got a data challenge. And what the Data Quality Initiative does in very simple terms is it will allow you to compare your data set to the data set that we have, using a couple of the key identifiers like the song code that HFA historically associated with your work, which we will perpetuate then as an MLC song code. So we're not going to make people start from scratch and set up new codes, or something like the ISWC, which is universal, right? And we'll compare what you've got with what we've got based on those common connectors, and then show you where there are discrepancies. It's a really simple concept, but in most places around the world, you don't have the ability to do that now. With most organizations, you can't do that. So just being able to see that comparison, we think, is going to go a long way toward helping people then focus their attention on what isn't right, as opposed to wading through all of your data to find what isn't right, and figuring that out on your own. And again, that initiative, now that it's launched, is something that we're open to and hoping to talk with as many people about as possible. How that works for everybody will vary. And one of the things we're going to have done pretty quickly is a way for folks who can put their data into an Excel file. We'll have a format that you can use so that it's pretty user-friendly and pretty low tech. Obviously, if you have a proprietary system, it becomes a little more complicated potentially. And then for folks who use technology platforms like a Vistex or other companies, we're going to work to help enable you to generate the files in the right format. And again, it's an all of the above approach. If you want to do this, we want to figure out how to do it with you. So it's not about focusing on one or two people or one or two solutions. It's about trying to find those solutions for as many of you as possible. The data organization form was meant to be a really low-tech way to show people, primarily self-administered songwriters, what is it you need to start preparing or thinking about. Because again, if you go to the other end of the spectrum where folks may not even fully understand the distinction between publishing and sound recording rights, right? I mean, this part of the set of our stakeholders could be, you know, the folks that are making music in a bedroom that really don't understand the rights because they haven't made this a business yet in a meaningful way. We want to just try to make the information as simple to understand. So that form shows you what you'll need to start organizing. If you've already got this organizational, this information in a spreadsheet or a database, don't use the form. It's not going to help you. But if you're starting with a notebook of songs and you don't know where to start, that form gives you a good introduction to start to see what you need. And the good news is most of the information is information that people will know. There are only 3 data points that we might think of as traditional data points: the ISWC, the IPI number, and the ISRC that might feel like data. Things like the name of the song and the name of the writer, those are things that don't feel like data. They just feel like information that songwriters will know. So that form is meant for that purpose, as a way of just beginning to share what we need ahead of that portal launch. Third thing, who has to become a member? Anyone who gets paid mechanicals today. So if you are receiving a check for mechanicals, digital audio mechanicals today from a digital service, then you'll need to become a member of the MLC to get paid. So that will include publishing companies, rights administrators, the foreign CMOs for sure. And then again, if you're a songwriter and you self-administer, which means you're not working with one of those types of companies to do the administration for you, then you would also need to join. But again, we think most songwriters will be working with organizations like that. So if we think about the universe of songwriters, the universe of self-administered songwriters will be a smaller subset of that. And again, how big or how small, we don't know, but we'll certainly have a view of that in a year when we've started to see the data. So again, what can you do now? Play your part, get organized, you know, look at the data you have. If you organize it in the system, reach out to us if you want to explore participating in the Data Quality Initiative. We're hoping that that isn't difficult and that lots of people will be able to do that. If you're a publisher, this doesn't relate to musical works data, but HFA has now sent out its first request asking you if you want to agree to let HFA share your account and financial data with the MLC. That's an easy step for you to take that just saves you the trouble of inputting that data later. It's not about musical works data, it's about your financial and account data, the stuff that's personal and private that a company like HFA can't just share with other people because they think you might want them to do that. They need you to say yes. We've gotten a great response from the first note that they sent out, and the percentage of people saying yes was 99 point something. So I think it's a pretty straightforward, easy thing. It's a no-brainer. It's just about you typing in your financial information a second time or asking them or saying to them you can share it. But again, if you get the opt-in, saying yes takes care of that part of it. And then again, as we roll out the portal in the next few months, joining the MLC if you are someone who collects mechanicals, so you get portal access, and then beginning to work on cleaning your data. And if as many people as possible can do all those things, we'll be in much better shape come January when we start to get money and usage data for the first time and then begin the process of paying. But needless to say, there's a whole nother set of chapters to the book that start in 2021. And I'm not going to get ahead of us now. I'm going to pause and maybe stop and then open it up to questions.
Yeah, that'll be great. I would love for you to expand a little bit on the clean up your data. That's what you could be doing now, is clean up your data. Can you be specific and think about like self-administered writers too, who will be cleaning up their own data? What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, if you're if you're truly self-administered and you're doing things in a pretty manual way, it might be, again, looking at that form and asking yourself, do I know the answers to those, roughly 10 questions for each of the songs that I've written and have a mechanical interest in? Because again, many people may know that information, but they may not have thought about it. They may not have written it down. And when they ultimately sign on to the portal for the first time and they go to register or work for the first time, those are the questions that they're going to be prompted to answer. So the more that you can start thinking about that, not the better. And again, I can't assume or presume where people are starting. So for some folks, that may mean literally getting that notebook where they've been writing song lyrics, and that's the physical representation of their songs, or the book where they jot their notes and saying, okay, who did I write the song with, right? Or how, if I'm writing with a group of people in my band, because we're writers and performers, maybe for the first time we're going to ask that question. How much do each of us get? Those are questions that I remember, when I was a musician, it wasn't the first question you answered when you sat down with a group of people to say, let's make music together, let's write music. And so again, there's a group of people for whom those really basic questions that for many of you may be like, really? But that's a question you have to ask. I think if you're a publisher or an administrator of any kind, it's looking in your systems and beginning to think about, again, whether there are issues that you are already aware of that you can begin to work on. And if not, it's about reaching out to then understand how you can engage with us on that data quality initiative and what that's going to look like. And again, I think there may be lots of variations on the theme, but my guess is, there will be users who have proprietary systems. There'll be folks who have built solutions in Excel, and then there'll be folks who use some of the third-party tech platforms. And so in very general terms, there are 3 buckets there. And we're hoping that as we engage with more and more people, we'll be able to find, one of those 3 solutions for each of them.
Excellent, excellent. Do we have some questions from our folks? I'm looking in the, I don't mind you guys unmuting and asking the question yourself.
Make it a free for all. Cindy had a couple of questions that I remember we got, so I'll just touch on those really quickly. There's a first question about the data and the ownership of the data. And again, I tried to speak to that in the front end. The mechanics of how we manage and store data behind the scenes are technical. I'm not the technical expert, Richard Thompson is, but the data will be owned by the MLC. But really it's a public database. And so it will be publicly available data. It will become a public good. And in that way, I don't think it's even accurate to say the MLC will own the data. It means the data will be public from here on out forever, unless Congress changes the law, which is highly unlikely. And in that way, it becomes a public good. So that's the first question. How will collection work with foreign copyrights? So the short and overly simplistic answer is it'll work the same way that it works for US copyrights, which is to say, if you wrote a song and your song is made available on a digital audio service in the US, then in theory, we're collecting money for that song. And if you represent that song, either as a collective management organization or as a foreign publisher, or again, you're just a self-administered songwriter in a country other than the US, you have the right to get paid, and you can do that in the same ways that folks in the US can. Needless to say, we could do a many hours long program on the complexities of that, and I don't want to minimize the complexities in any way. I also don't want to speak to or try to speak to all of those today because it will be complicated, but in simple terms, we expect that the foreign CMOs that represent mechanical rights will join the MLC as well, and will be managing their data in the same way that publishers do. And we're going to try to kind of set up the way we operate in the same way for all of them, because what's behind the scenes is the same. It's just the way that that's happening, and the organizations themselves obviously are complex organizations. That leads to a third question about SysNet. We won't be using that, at least initially, but we are going to be relying on the IPI numbers, and so we will be using the IPI database. And again, I'm not a technical expert on how some of those ex-US systems work, but the one point I would say is, unlike any other CMO outside the US, we don't represent US writers or interests outside the US. So we're not collecting money from a French collection society and passing that on to people here. So in that way, we're going to be having a very different relationship with those ex-US organizations. It'll essentially be a one-way organization. We will be sending information and data and money out, but we'll not be collecting that money in on behalf of anybody in the US.
Travis McFedrich, he had a question. Once we join the MLC and enter our data, do we continue to register songs and receive payments from the HFA? What is HFA's role after the MLC starts?
So that's a great question. So HFA is going to be helping us administer the digital audio mechanicals that we administer. They're a service provider. And because the data that we're using now, the musical works data, is going to be this public data, you should not have to register your data with them again. You'll be able to register with us alone. And the hope is that other organizations over time will also take advantage of that bulk data feed, and we'll figure out ways for them to leverage that data. But the expectation is you're not going to have to register it twice. But what is HFA's role after the MLC starts? That's a little more complicated, because while they're our vendor for what we need to do, there are still administrative things or services that they offer that go beyond what we do as the MLC. So in that way, HFA will still be providing other administrative services to digital services and publishers that may want those. And that's true of other companies in that space, like MRI, that's certainly a prominent one, or Crunch Digital. So the role of administrators doesn't go away just because we're performing elements of that administration from digital audio mechanicals. There's obviously a piece of it that we'll be doing that probably won't be necessary for others to do, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other valuable services that those organizations will continue to provide and that you'll want them to continue to provide.
Terry Nelson Carpenter, hello, from the AAMP is here. She has a question. With this public-facing database, are you providing split information and contact information to the public? Also, what identifiers are you going to be sharing on the public-facing database?
So I want to not be specific about the data points because I don't have them in front of me and I might get them wrong, but there will be some level of contact information in all likelihood on the public database, but not the full extent of the personal information that you would provide. So I think I have heard it described as there will be an email address likely for the primary administrator that we would make available on the public database. And I'll have to get back to you on the splits. I don't know, and I don't want to get that wrong. But the goal is to provide any information that would be valuable to the public on the public database, and to keep the financial information and the things that you would think of as personal behind the scenes. I saw another question from Annie Dinnerman in the chat. I'm sorry, I'm looking both ways, but I just want to pick that up because if you're publishing this with Songtrust, you probably don't need to sign up with the MLC because Songtrust will be interacting with us on your behalf. But I would point out that that question is always a tough one because it implies that you have one solution for all of the works that you control. And it may well be that people have different solutions for different subsets of work. So what I would say is if all of your musical works are managed by Songtrust, then the answer is Songtrust will be handling this administration for all of your musical works. If the answer is 60%, 70%, then that's your answer for that 70%. And then you'd have to ask another set of questions for the remainder.
And will there be a way for us to just double check and make sure that our publishers or the Songtrust are making sure that our works are registered properly?
Yeah, I think that the best thing you can do is reach out to those people directly. One of the really challenging things for the MLC is we're trying to communicate to everybody, knowing that not everybody's going to have to do the same things. So what I want to strongly encourage, and I think for any of you that are music publishers or administrators, you will appreciate it. If you're working with a music publisher, call your music publisher. If you're working with an administrator, call your administrator. I don't want you to try to answer that question without talking to your partner today, because that's your partner and you should be figuring those details out with them, not with us as an organization that knows much less, if nothing, about your business and how you've set it up.
But can you, as an owner of the works, can you go into the MLC database to double check?
Yes, you will have public access to your musical works data and be able to see how it is set up. Yes.
Roberta, did you have a question?
I have a question.
Hi, Monica.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Busy, as you are, apparently. What is your plan, your educational plan, and sort of interface for all these DIY writers who are probably the ones that should be benefiting from all those NOIs that are in Washington, although I'm sure there's many of our works that are in those as well?
Yeah, it's a great question. There are two things right now that we're focused on, and this is by no means you know, a limit on what we will do, but it's where we're starting. First, we have a head of educational partnerships, Serona Elton, who many of you will know. She's been in the industry for many years, and she helps to run the music business program at University of Miami. One of the things that I think we've believed from the beginning is that one way to reach a lot of folks in that DOI section is to reach them at the beginning of their journey, their musical journey. And for many of them who choose to study music business, that's at those music business programs. So we'll be doing a lot of outreach, and we've begun that now through some of the faculty organizations to ultimately provide a toolkit of resources that we can distribute through those organizations to anyone who teaches music business, first at the college level, but we can also then expand that out to high school level and give educators the information they need to begin to educate those young creators on what the MLC is about and how they need to connect with us. So that's one area or initiative. The second, actually I'll say three things. The second initiative is you know, we've begun to engage more broadly with the organizations that represent creators by genre, because we think that's another really important way to reach people. And there are lots of those organizations. So reaching out to them and then again, providing them with the same type of educational information they can distribute to their members is a second way. And then the third way, we have another leadership role on our team. It's the head of third-party partnerships, and that's Dave Bogan, another person that many of you will know. One of the areas that we're focusing on there is reaching out to those independent distributors, the companies that distribute music today, some of whom, or some of which have some publishing admin solutions, like Song Trust, or they've engaged with Song Trust, or companies that don't have any solution and essentially don't solve for that at all. And we think that there's an opportunity, and we've begun to have that dialogue with some of the services around tailoring messaging to their stakeholders. So if you are signed up with a service like TuneCore, they have a music publishing administrative offering. Some people may have that, some may not. So we can speak directly to TuneCore customers and say, hey, if you're a customer of TuneCore, you probably fit into one of these two buckets. Here's how the MLC plays out for you, depending on which one you're in. And again, we can go through each of those services. We've got a list of, I think, 30 of them. And the goal would be to have that level of engagement with each of them. Dave's working on that now to begin to provide the right messaging to them based on how, what their service offerings look like. So those are three things that we're doing right out of the gate. But again, that's the start.
My concern is more for, well, I mean, I'm concerned about all those people, but I think a lot of the lost data is from records from, say, the 70s, 80s, maybe 60s, companies, record companies, smaller record companies that were successful, whose music is still listened to a lot, but they're not in business anymore, and they never collected publishing information very well anyway. So the services release their music, and it's being, you know, listened to, but nobody seems to know who they are or where they are. And can you release these kits that you're making available to the conservatories and these organizations as widely distributed through the website and promoted in public, so that maybe some of these people could come out, you know, from the basement or wherever they are, not knowing anything about this at all, or how to do what you're asking them to do with regard to data.
Yes. Yes. And I think you're right. Well, I think you're right in suggesting that the challenge is finding those people who have not yet been connected, and then more fundamentally figuring out, you know, what that group looks like. Where are they? So, you know, when we think about stakeholder engagement, and particularly songwriter engagement, we think about it as a multifaceted strategy. We have to think of all the different ways that we might connect to those people, and then send messaging out through every channel possible to reach them, not knowing which one's going to connect. So, you know, speaking with and working with your organization and all the organizations that exist is one way to do it, but it's not enough. And yeah, making it available on the website, absolutely. But I don't want to assume that just putting something up on a website is going to do it either, because if you don't know what the MLC is, you're not going to be on our website, right? You don't know you don't know that we exist to even look. So I think that becomes the fundamental long-term challenge, is how do we continue to push that message out as broadly as possible, knowing that that doesn't end. There's not a point where we can say, well, we're good enough. It's a never-ending process, much in the same way that the data, making the data better is a never-ending process, right? Because if you work with data, if I asked you, is the data for your set of 100 works, you know, correct? That's an answerable question. You could get to the point where you could say yes. But will the data for every musical work that's exploited in the US be perfect ever? That's unlikely. So there's an important aspirational component to this here that I think we have to embed in our culture. Certainly as an organization, we're doing that, but more broadly, which is that for advocates, this never ends, right? And for those of us that care about getting this right, making sure that we pay as many people as possible, that process of education never ends.
I think sorry. No, I think we all agree that, you know, it's never going to be perfect, but there's a good 20 to 25% of unpaid revenue that's been market shared out to the majors and bigger independents that should be going to a lot of other songwriters. And
absolutely.
And so there was talk in December at the Copyright Office at that first MLC meeting that an educational initiative need to happen in a fun way on like YouTube and the social media with songwriters of significance who could make everybody aware of the MLC and do educational things that were in a creative way that would reach people. Is that being talked about? And then I promise I won't say anything else.
Yes, yes, yes. It is, and as you know, we have a few of those prominent songwriters on the board, and we are talking about how to put out educational content in a way that is accessible and fun and creative and not dry and boring and intimidating. Cindy, I just saw another question there. Is it possible to terminate your MLC membership? Yes, I guess if you don't want to be paid anymore, you don't have to be connected with us. But I want to emphasize, membership is not like, you know, the American Express card. You're not paying for it. It's just, it's the term, you know, that we're at least going to start using to describe the connection we're asking people who want to be paid to make. And I certainly think, you know, membership connotes the idea that we're providing a benefit. And for us, it aligns us in the right way, right? We're trying to do things to benefit the people that we have to pay. But if you didn't want to be paid, you don't have to be paid.
I think many of us will remember the early days of Sound Exchange, and Nita's here on the call, but I just remember they were just desperate to get people to sign up for the Sound Exchange, and they were at South by Southwest with their big, you know, conference tables with their orange margarita glasses, giving out free margaritas, trying to get people to sign up for Sound Exchange, and people were weary. They didn't want to join. They thought it was something. Yes. It takes a long time to create, I guess, trust. And I think our industry is a little more trustworthy of this type of stuff now because of Sound Exchange. But I wanted to ask a question, what your relationship is like with the performing rights organizations, and are they going to help you? I mean, they have the connection to most of the writers in the United States who are releasing music. And how is that going?
Yes, we are hoping to to work with them on that outreach. And we have two members of our leadership team who work for two of those PROs. But again, we're we're operating in a different space, and so I want to make sure that we don't confuse people as well. But yeah, we want to get the message out through and get a message out that's clear. We are not replacing your PRO, right? So the MLC is not it's in addition to the relationship you have. It's not in any way changing that. And that, that's one of the questions that one of our board members, every time we talk, he makes that point, like, make sure you tell people that you're not replacing their PRO, because you wouldn't just know that intuitively, right? And all of these organizations with acronyms, it becomes potentially confusing for people and tiresome. They don't want to learn the alphabet of organizations. So yes.
Will you be able to share the toolkit with us once this meeting's done, so we can share within our members?
Yes, when we have that done. Right now, what we're doing is reaching out through those faculty organizations to understand better what it is they're looking for. And again, some of it might be in the form of, here are the notes that you can use to plug in 15 minutes to your lecture. There may be a way that we formatted that doesn't make as much sense to distribute to a different group, but I still think we're going to make it all available publicly. So yes is the answer.
Okay, what's the ETA on having those materials available?
Well, we want to have them out to folks in time for them to start using when they lecture this fall. So it'll probably be in the next 4 to 6 weeks.
Great. I know that SONA, they have their sexy metadata action group.
Yes.
Which, are trying.
Swag.
Yeah, they're swag, exactly. So I know they're trying to put it in a way that's digestible to members. Hopefully, we can take all of these efforts and put them in one place.
Well, I would just say, Sharon, yes, but I also think it's really important for us to encourage as much creativity as possible in the messaging, right? Because to Monica's point, what is fun and creative for some may not be for others. So I think the diversity of ideas there is what benefits us all. And they definitely, we had a great call with them at the end of last week about SMAG, and it's very funny, and they already do like an annual show for their members, and they're talking about things they can do. And I think that's great. But the question I think for every organization is how do you make this fun and accessible for your folks, and what does that look like, right? I think as an example, there are some of us that are lawyers by background. What might be fun and entertaining for SONA may not work for a legal organization, and or a group of lawyers who want to kind of have a more cut and dry, like, tell me what I need to know. So yeah, again, I think the good part there is there's no shortage on the ways we can communicate it. The key is being clear on what needs to be communicated, and then hopefully getting everybody to communicate that. So for this group, I would love to see you all come up with your version of this, right? What it looks like to be a cool New York group of creators. May not be as cheesy as it would be in other places, but it'll be effective, and that's all that matters. David mentioned something. I'm sorry. The VizTex piece. We're working with VizTex, and we'll say more about that in the next week or two. But any platform that you're using to organize your data is a platform that we want to be engaged with to help you export your data in a way that allows you to compare it to the DQI. So if you reach out to us through our website, there's a way that you can engage with us or request to be contacted about the DQI. If you do that now, David, then we can have that conversation.
Melanie has a good question. The MLC is getting data from HFA, but is there a preference to get the data directly from publishers instead of HFA?
It's a great question. And I think to some degree, it maybe underscores something that I need to clarify. We essentially have the data from HFA because we've been working with them behind the scenes on other aspects of the administration. So it's not like we're going to say, do you want us to use your data or some other data? It's impossible to do that, because if we were to do that, then we would be having that same conversation with everybody individually. So what we're saying is the HFA databases or the HFA data is going to be our starting point. But from the point at which you connect with us, through membership in the portal, at that point, we only prefer your data. So whatever you submit becomes the data of record. So it's not an either or on the front end. It's more that that's the starting point. So we're not starting from scratch. And then everything after that is about you and what you give us. And that's captured forever in this public system of record.
More questions coming in. Do you want me to read them, or do you want to?
One of the advantages right now is that you can get your. I was looking through. Yes, there are challenges with the HFA data.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the questions too, which is awkward for everybody else while we're reading, but yes, what Dana wrote in the chat, I think is right. Big data dump and then encouraging, empowering publishers to then ensure their data is accurate by playing your part. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yes, thank you, Dana. Are we missing anybody? Let's see.
Oh, and Lori Geltman is on SMAG. I love that. It's hard not to say SMAG and chuckle to yourself.
I'll ask another question. Ken, what's your greatest, or Kris, sorry, what's your greatest challenge right now, and how, as publishers and songwriters, can we help you?
Well, that's a great question. I don't think this is a challenge, at least for us day to day, right? Because what we're doing behind the scenes is building the company that's going to provide this service and hopefully work with all of you. But what I do think is a challenge, maybe a broader challenge, is you know, there was a history here, right? And I won't go into the details of it, but suffice to say, the reason there's an MLC is because there was a fundamental failure in the market. Digital services were not paying creators and publishers, and they weren't paying them to the tune of, you know, surely millions of dollars and likely much more. And we don't know what that is. So it's not about the number, it's that there was a failure. And the MLC was the product of legislation, which is by definition a compromise, right? Negotiating at Congress is about different stakeholders advocating for what they want, and then a result that pleases no one, at least entirely. So the MMA is legislation. And as legislation goes, it's actually pretty fantastic, because I think there was a pretty large area of consensus among a lot of different groups that don't normally agree on things. And then, you know, how to build the MLC. There was a lot of controversy around that, I guess. I mean, you know, there were multiple groups that wanted to be the MLC. I think though where we are now is at a turning point, and what I try to say every time I speak with people, regardless of their history, is in part because I wasn't a part of a lot of that personally. All of that happened, and that allowed us to get to this point. But now we have a choice. Each of us has a choice. Do we participate in this new thing and try to make it realize its potential and be the best solution for all of us that it can be, or not? I know with certainty it'll be better. I think the question is, how much better will it be? And my hope is that everybody will help us make it better, because that doesn't come at anyone else's expense. And the more that, you know, each of you can kind of try to encourage people to take that approach of turning the page and saying, hey, let's try to make this thing work now and make it better. I think in the long run that will help. So I'm looking at a couple more questions. So just to clarify from Terry, if someone does not opt in for the HFA transfer if data, it will be, no. The opt-in is about the personal financial data that again, HFA can't give us because we're not a related entity, right? In the same way that your bank has personal information for you, and they can't just give that to people. And they ask you to opt in from time to time to let them share that information. And I always say no, because I don't want them doing that. So if you don't say to HFA, yes, share that information, just means when you register for the portal, you're gonna have to give that to us, right? Because we can't pay you if we don't know what your bank account number is. The opt-in is not about the transfer of musical works data. Again, as Dana correctly said, we're getting that data dump that's already happening, and then we're empowering and encouraging publishers and others, everyone else, to look at their data and then work to make that data better. And things like the Data Quality Initiative that allow you to compare your data with the data that we have will hopefully make that easier. And over time, we have to find ways to make that process much easier than it was. It's not easy now. And CWR is a difficult delivery format to begin with, but it's not a data comparison tool. So our challenge is to make that process easier.
From Melanie Santa Rosa, have you found that the DSPs are planning on moving away from direct deals to the MLC?
I don't have the information yet to know whether they or publishers are, but what I have said when people have asked is that becomes a question for publishers and DSPs to answer, right? They do those voluntary deals. You do those deals today for reasons that go beyond administration. So whether they go away depends on those negotiations. So we'll know more about that after January. But and again, even at that point, I think that's probably a more appropriate topic for digital services and publishers because it's their deal. We just have to be prepared to administer regardless of whether those deals continue or not. And that's what we're preparing for.
Ed Ranzano, because it's legislation, I heard a rumor that everyone will have to register their works with the Copyright Office to be a part of the MLC. Is this true? Seems odd to me. Can you squash or confirm that rumor?
I'm going to say I haven't heard that requirement, but I'm not going to go so far as to squash it just because I'd like to ask some folks on our team about it, but that has not come up in any of the conversations that I've had, and it would not make sense to me.
Yeah.
And Ellen, we'll make sure we ask that question and get back to you all directly on that, 'cause that's a specific question.
What wasn't that in relation to the NOIs? Like the registration at the Copyright Office, because you couldn't have a claim, couldn't make a claim if the NOI was issued on the Copyright Office? Was there something to that connection? Because I remember there was an AIMP lecture about making sure your song was registered in order to participate in that sort of interim income that's caught between what happened before the MMA and what's happening with the MMA. Is that right or no?
Ed, do you have a clarification on that? I guess not.
No?
Sorry. Yeah, that's sort of what I think we were at the same AIMP thing, Monica, where I heard that. I wasn't quite sure if it's mandatory or not. Plus, at ASCAP around the office, I'm hearing there's a lot of indie writers and things, and people are asking, well, does that mean I have to pay the $35 registration fee for each of my works, at the Copyright Office to even be part of MLC? And I'd like to just squash.
I will make sure we get confirmation, but I have never heard that, and fundamentally that can't be right because, yeah, the financial piece you just touched on.
Yeah, that's what my answer was, but that's what I'm looking for. Like I can say, hey, you told me. that's the right thing now.
I'll make sure we get that answer back. It's the first time I've been asked the question, and I don't know sitting here today.
All right, cool. No, hey, appreciate the honesty. It's all good.
Yeah. And that's worth saying too, again, we're building this from scratch as we start to drive the car. And I'm trying very hard when I talk, not to pretend that I have all the answers, because I certainly don't. And I don't want to pretend that I've been doing this as long as most of you have been doing it, because I've done lots in the industry, but it hasn't been this as much as many of you. So another benefit, I think, to the dialogue and to that idea that we're all in this together now, let's figure out how to make this work, is the idea that we'll be much better if we get the benefit of the knowledge people have, rather than having people use that knowledge to point out the things that think we don't get right. I mean, what's the benefit of that? I mean, other than saying, hey, look, I pointed out something they don't know, right? Like, okay, you're smarter than me. That I don't have a problem with that. So I do think it's about leveraging the knowledge of this community. And there's a lot of it here. And then learning from the things that didn't work well in the past as well. We should try to do better and certainly not do worse.
Melanie Santa Rosa said, we were told that publishers would need to advise of their direct deals that we're continuing to the MLC. Are you saying we cannot advise of that until after January 21?
No, what I'm saying is we will need to know if direct deals continue, because if a digital service is in part operating under the blanket license and in part operating under a direct deal, when they give us the usage reports for the first month and then we run it through the matching process, When we get back to them with a response file, we're going to have to, they're going to have to tell us, right, of all the stuff that we paid you, here's the subset that we run through this voluntary deal, right? We administer that separately. And then the question will be, how are you going to administer that? Do you want the MLC to also administer that separately, or do you want to administer that through someone else, or do you want to administer on your own? So we're going to need to know that. What I don't know now, sitting here today, because again, I'm not a music publisher or a digital service, is whether those parties intend to continue those direct contractual relationships that they have beyond 2021. That's what I don't know. But come January 21, I will need to know what they are in order to do the administrative task. We will need to know. Forgive me, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to need to know. Our team's going to need to know.
Excellent. Terry Nelson Carpenter of the AIMP says you have our full support and we look forward to working with you.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate the correction too. I've gotten Kristen a lot in my life because there weren't a lot of Chris's with a K when I grew up, and I heard one Ken today, and that happened too. And when I was at Warner, the CFO I worked with was Ken Williams. So you could only imagine the havoc that ran, because we were constantly, it was Chris, Ken, Chris. But I'll respond to any of the above. And I'm just happy to be here.
Oh, we're happy to have you. You know, it's just so interesting. I think we're all just sort of learning and trying to figure out what we need to do to prep as administrators. And I see a lot of administrators actually on the call here, people who are handling the songs, and just, you know, it's just one more thing. I'm waiting for someone to get a great list together. Like, here's your checklist of things. You've written a song. Now what you do is you got to do these 5 things. And this will be one more thing to add to the list.
You're right. Though we have certainly talked about that, Linda. I think there's an opportunity for us to help kind of put something like that together, again, as a way of explaining, like, this doesn't change your need to sign up with a PRO if you're in the US, right? We want people to get that right.
No, and it's I mean, a list like that, Nita Raghuvanshi, she runs the managers forum, and you know, this is all very helpful to managers to know, because they're all wondering, what the heck, oh God, another thing for me to do. What do I have to do now? And
one of the things we're talking about is like a kind of a one sheet, you know, of the questions you might get if you're a manager and the answers to provide. And if you're a lawyer, here are the questions your clients might ask, and here are the answers to provide. I think that's another effective way to kind of provide the information in a way that's user friendly. And you know, certainly there are a number of lawyers that I've spoken with about that idea.
When I was at Sound Exchange, I did create an artist or creator checklist. And so it's quite an old document, but it is out there floating somewhere. So I'll be sure to get my hands back on it and
great.
share it with you and with Ellen as well. So you guys
there you
can,
go.
You know,
What's old is new again.
what's old is new again. And Terry mentioned, of course, the NSAI and SONA, terrific organizations. They were our guests last week. They both help and are getting the word out as well.
Yeah, and again, there is no limit on the number of organizations that we can partner with on getting this message out. So again, every organization is one that we want to work with. And if you're members of other organizations, you know, introduce them to us, reach out to Ellen and connect. And we're doing a lot of these Zooms right now. Someone touched on Sound Exchange, and I remember maybe not when they first started, but I certainly remember seeing them a lot. And I'm actually quite grateful that we don't have to kind of be out at conferences handing out free stuff, because one, most of that winds in the garbage and it's a waste of money, and that always killed me. But two, I think these kinds of conversations are actually a lot more meaningful, right? I mean, catching somebody when they're at South by, maybe you catch someone who's interested, but most times it's like they're going to the next thing, right? I need to get to my session. I need to go see that band. I'm trying to find people for lunch, and it's hard to get people's attention, but these forums I think are much more effective, at least for this morning, right? If you logged on, probably you logged on because you were interested in hearing more about this. And so we've been able to have a very direct conversation about a subject of interest and not have that cluttered by all the other things you might want to do if we were together at a larger event that has other appeals to it than an update from the MLC.
Well, they were giving out free margaritas, so it stopped me.
And even legal? You give out free booze? Maybe in Texas. You can do lots in Texas, right?
Everything's, everything's bigger in Texas. Anybody have any more questions for Kris? This has all been so helpful. I think we're just kind of absorbing.
Whiskey. What I would, I don't drink anymore. What I would say is, you know, I'd love to find time to come back again in a couple months if there's interest. And certainly
Oh,
in the
that's a good idea.
meantime, if you all want to collect questions from folks and then funnel them over to us, that's great. What we're beginning to do, and hopefully we'll have some of this up on the website, as we get questions from events like this, we run them through a group of people internally to try to get the right answer and then the best articulation of the answer. And then the goal is to start putting this up on our website. And then incorporate it into other materials that we're distributing. So these questions aren't, you know, one-offs. We're capturing these and then trying to leverage them as examples of things that people are wondering about, so that over time we're not answering the same questions over and over again. We can allow people to get to the next question after they get the first answer. So
Yeah, that's a great
if you do
idea.
that,
If anybody has questions after the fact, you can shoot them over to Sharon, and we'll compile them and send them to Ellen and Kris, just so you have them. And I love the idea of you coming back in a couple of months as you've you know, cleaned up and gotten more information and done your thing.
I don't know if I'm going to clean up. This is pretty much my quarantine outfit. I laugh too. I wear the hat because under the harsh lights, my my modest head of hair often reflects negatively. So it's,
I know the feeling.
Ed, I saw you and I was like, that's a guy we could talk razors about.
Got my hat right next to me.
There you go. I like that. Right. I just, that's, will be hip if I change the direction of
At
that
least
hat.
it's a New York hat. That's what we love.
And I'm not doing that to pander. There was a year when I was, I think 4, that I slept in my Yankees hat for the entire year. Like, that was my team from the very beginning, will always be my first team.
Okay, so anything else here? Well, we can't
Well,
thank
thank
you
you.
enough.